Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating document that outlines a tabletop role-playing simulation called HaGaR version 2. Now, on the surface, it looks like this highly structured, almost punishingly difficult survival game. But as we'll see as we go through this, it's actually a brilliantly disguised, fully immersive educational tool designed to teach early human history. We're going to explore exactly how a game about picking berries and dodging apex predators literally forces players to confront the brutal realities of early human existence. To really understand this whole experience, we first have to understand the stakes. Right out of the gate, the rules hit you with a terrifying probability, 1 in 12. That's the exact mathematical chance you have of suffering a fatal death roll whenever you take on the game's highest risk activities. Just imagine sitting around a table with your friends, right? Every single time you decide your clan needs more food, there's this unavoidable looming 1 in 12 chance that your character is just going to meet a horrific, permanent end. It instantly sets this tone of intense vulnerability. So, here's our roadmap for the Explainer today. We'll start with the stakes of survival, then look at the core gameplay loop, move into high risk, high reward, explore the systems of early survival, touch on community and mutual aid, and wrap up with evaluating clan strategy. Okay, Section 1, Stakes of Survival, Winning the Simulation. So this isn't just some quick, throwaway board game. We're talking about a full 45 to 60-minute roleplay experience where you literally form tribes. And the craziest part? The winning clan isn't just the one that manages to survive the longest. No, victory requires balancing two absolute necessities, warmth and sustenance. You've got to end the game with the largest stitched blanket and the highest total food weight. And I absolutely love how tactile the rules make this feel. The food is represented by actual nuts, berries, and little mini chocolate bars standing in for meat and fish. You can't just hoard the food, and you can't just focus entirely on the blanket either. If you ignore one for the other, your clan fails. Moving on to Section 2, the core gameplay loop, navigating the danger. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the mechanics are actually incredibly simple, yet they're designed to produce just massive amounts of anxiety. To survive, you really need to understand what happens on every single term. You follow a very strict sequence. First, you pay the entry fee for whatever station you decide to visit. Second, you roll a white die to determine your specific event, which is numbered 1 through 6. And third, and this is the big one, you simultaneously roll a colored die to see your consequence. Your entire fate is completely bound to these two dice rolling together. And that brings us to the absolute most nerve-wracking part of the turn. That colored die, it literally dictates your destiny. If you roll an even number, so a 2, 4, or 6, you get a neutral outcome or maybe even a distinct benefit. You get to breathe a huge sigh of relief. But if you roll an odd number, a 1, 3, or 5, you're facing a severe negative consequence. And if you happen to roll that odd number on the absolute worst possible event, yeah, that's where you hit that fatal death roll we talked about earlier. So the real trick is how you actually survive those negative consequences, right? And you do it using what's called the Quick Resource Wallet. The game has this incredibly complex fruit-based medical economy. Let's say you get bitten by a snake. Well, you better hope you have an orange. Got a stomachache? You're going to need lemons. Broken bones or animal gashes? Raspberries and grapes are your pain relievers. Now, I know it sounds kind of silly at first, until you realize that if you suffer a consequence and you cannot pay this specific fruit toll, the station literally freezes your turn. Your dice are held hostage until a teammate physically comes over to visit you and donates the cure. It forces some incredibly strict cooperative resource management. All right, Section 3, high risk, high reward, facing the stations. So players have 3 different environment stations they can visit to gather their resources. The first one is the gathering station. Now, the big appeal here is that it's entirely free to enter. But let me tell you, free definitely does not mean safe. Even when you're just out there picking wild fruit, an odd roll can result in venomous snake bites, sour batches that give you terrible stomach aches, nasty falls with broken arms, bee attacks, or worst case, a fatal plunge down a ravine. Literally, 1 minute you're just looking for some nice berries, and the next the rocks give way and it's game over. Now, if you want better resources like fish, you're going to head over to the fishing station. But this one costs you 1 nut just to enter. It also introduces this wild physical mechanic, a 1-minute ball and cup physical challenge to actually simulate catching the fish. And the hazards? They definitely escalate here. You're looking at bad slips into freezing water, snagged lines, getting absolutely covered in leeches, or hitting that dreaded death roll where your river raft shatters in raging rapids and you get swept away. Finally, we have the big one. the hunting station. This yields the absolute best rewards, but it requires some intense resource management. It costs 1 nut to get in, plus you have to carefully track an ammunition inventory of 3 arrows. The dangers here are just brutal. You can lose your arrows on missed shorts, twist your ankle in mammoth footprints, get heavily injured by a mammoth trampling, take a huge gash from a wild boar charge, or, if you miss your shot, get completely mauled to death by an apex predator. High risk, for sure. Section 4. Systems of Early Survival. Comprehend the assessment. And this brilliantly illustrates the real purpose behind all of this stress and complexity. HaGaR isn't just some tabletop game. It's actually a graded assessment mapped directly to the BC curriculum. Right after the simulation ends, the students are hit with this exact prompt. How did these specific game mechanics simulate the actual daily realities of early human survival? They have to sit down and write a paragraph explaining how balancing those free, low-risk gathering actions against the expensive, high-risk hunts force them to really understand the deep tension between short-term survival and long-term stability. The grading rubric connects all of this directly to the big idea that geographic conditions and natural resources fundamentally shaped early societies. The targeted competency they are looking at here is cause and consequence. So think about this. The students aren't just writing an essay about a board game. They're actually using their gameplay logs, where they were frantically tracking fake arrows and hoarding medicinal berries, to construct abstract, highly compelling historical arguments about environmental hazards. It's pretty genius. Which leads us to Section 5. Community and mutual aid. Connect to society. In early human history, much like in this simulation, disaster isn't just possible, it's practically inevitable. So what actually happens when a player falls? Well, the game has this truly ingenious rule. Player elimination absolutely does not mean player removal. If you suffer a fatal death roll, you permanently move over to the home station to become a stitcher. Your new job is to assemble all the cloth pieces that your active, surviving hunters bring back. The game literally takes an individual's death and instantly transforms it into a vital, life-saving community benefit that contributes directly to the clan's ultimate win condition. The corresponding student prompt then asks them to connect those dynamics to historical human adaptation. Think about it from their perspective. When your teammate's turn was frozen solid because they couldn't cure a snakebite, and you had to sacrifice your own turn to walk over and hand them an orange, how does that mimic the actual mutual aid and division of labor that allowed early human communities to withstand major crises? Once again, the curriculum connection here is incredibly explicit. This part assesses the competency of perspective. Students are required to analyze the authentic cultural frameworks of early humans. They have to really unpack how ancient worldviews were shaped by intense resource limitations and community needs. And they do it by using their own in-game sacrifices as their primary data points. And our final section, Section 6, Evaluating Clan Strategy. Evaluate performance. After surviving the predators, carefully managing all those resources, and relying heavily on their community, the students have to officially judge their own performance. They're tasked with looking at their final score, that blanket size and total food weight we talked about, and critically evaluating their strategy. Did they actually take calculated risks out there, or did they just get incredibly lucky? And more importantly, the prompt asks them to explicitly detail the systemic changes they would make to their clan's economic decisions, trading habits, or risk management if they were forced to repeat the whole experience. The rubric used to grade this thinking and inquiry section is just fascinating. Notice how it scales up. To get an emerging grade, a student really just needs to identify basic day-to-day survival needs. To hit proficient, they've got to step it up and formulate well-supported arguments using the simulation data. But to reach that top extending tier, that requires demonstrating highly sophisticated systemic analysis. They have to analyze the deep economic, ecological, and structural choices that are built right into human development. This final evaluation is firmly grounded in the competency of ethical judgment and inquiry. The overarching educational objective here is to understand the intricate overlapping factors that lead to either the success, rise, or total decline of early societies. By literally forcing students to live through the resource scarcity, the brutal odds, and the absolute reliance on their tribe, the curriculum makes ancient history intensely personal and incredibly real. Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to consider. The HaGaR simulation uses dice and mini chocolate bars to teach us about ancient safety nets. But looking at your own world today, if your survival depended on a roll of the dice, would your community catch you when you fall or leave you to the predators? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.